How's it going, guys? Sorry for more Switch. That was the day. It's January 18th, 2021, and today we're going to talk about the spring forecast for this year for the entire lower 48. So, what type of weather conditions you'll experience this spring? I'll answer those questions right now, but before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content, and make sure to like if you like this video, and turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. So, let's begin by first taking a look at the typical pattern, the typical climate that occurs during the spring, during a certain phase, during a certain Nino phase. So as you can see, look at this map provided by the climate.gov, and you see that there's a difference between how much tornadoes you receive in a given year when there's a different phase. We have obviously the El Nino phase and the La Nina phase, and the purple represents that tornado or hail frequency is higher, and obviously the darker browns and the oranges represent lower tornado and hail frequency. And as you can see, the top map you see is the map for tornadoes in a given Nino phase, and you see that during the La Nina phase, we see a little bit more. We see a lot more purple spread throughout the map, sprawled throughout the map, and you see that it's like it extends to even the East Coast, and we see darker purples right around the South Central United States, right around Arkansas and Oklahoma, and this represents a more frequent chance of this represents a higher frequency of tornadoes typically when it's a La Nina phase. And during an El Nino phase, we see less tornadoes and a lower frequency of tornadoes during an El Nino phase. While I wouldn't say that these entirely are the complete things we need to keep in mind when forecasting the spring, because there's still a lot of other factors. However, the La Nina and El Nino phases definitely do play a major role in how much severe weather you'll receive in the Midwest. And as you can see in the La Nina phase, you're far more likely to receive more tornadoes. And this even extends down to the hail frequency, where during an La Nina phase, you're far more likely to receive hail all throughout the Midwest, and this extends to the East Coast as well. While during El Nino phase, you're far less likely to receive hail throughout the United States, and there's a far lower frequency of hail occurring in the United States. So your big question probably is, what phase are we going to be in headed into this spring? So if you've been paying attention to weather, you probably know that we are deep in a La Nina phase, and this was the same La Nina phase that brought a record-breaking hurricane season this last season during the year 2020, and it's still with us. If we take a look at the current Nino 3.4 temperature anomaly, and if you don't know what that is, the Nino 3.4 is pretty much the area between the Nino 4 and the Nino 3, and this is the most reliable area when determining what phase we are currently in the United States, whether we're in a La Nina or a neutral or El Nino phase. And as you can see for pretty much since May, the Nino 3.4 area has had temperatures that are typically below average, and it maintained its below average temperature reading for over 3 months, which makes it official that we are currently in a La Nina. However, I've been noticing over the past several months, from October, November, and going into December, you see that the temperature has been rising over the past 3 months, and this is representing a shift in the fate in the Nino phase, where it seems like we're approaching a neutral phase eventually. However, the thing is that although the temperatures are rising in the Nino 3.4 region, I don't think it's going to rise quick enough by the time we hit March, April, and May to really change to really change the phase from La Nina to maybe neutral, which could potentially change your spring forecast drastically, especially when it comes to severe weather. So I still do believe we're going to see a La Nina phase for the Midwest and as for the entire United States, and as a result, there's more likely of a chance you're going to see a more severe, more frequent severe weather events throughout the United States, throughout the Midwest, extending the East Coast, where you're more likely to receive hailstorms, you're more likely to see tornadoes. There's going to be a lot more widespread tornadoes as a result of a La Nina phase, and I don't really see the temperatures warming up enough in the Nino 3.4 region to really change the current forecast of a more severe weather more bigger severe weather threat in the United States. So the reason why the La Nina increases the chance of severe weather is because during the La Nina phase, the jet stream dip is a lot more pronounced. It dips a lot further southward, and you see that there's a lot of cool air that dips further southward as well. And also the La Nina phase typically, since the jet stream moves this far south, obviously a lot more moisture moves southward to the United States as well. There isn't any sort of ridge that's blocking this jet stream from bringing low pressure systems to the United States. So as a result, the precipitation increases throughout the Midwest and extending to the East Coast as well. And obviously, when there's a little bit more convection, that increases the chance of severe weather and thunderstorm activity, especially when it's backed up by this cool air from this dip in the jet stream that's more pronounced in the La Nina phase, which is the reason why we typically see more tornadoes and hailstorms during a La Nina phase than an El Nino phase, where during an El Nino phase, the polar jet stream is well up north. There's pretty dominant ridge. There's a pretty dominant ridge pretty much dominating the United States, keeping this jet stream up north. The same jet stream that brings a lot of low pressure systems further south and a lot of convection, and brings up a lot of convection. So as a result, during an El Nino phase, you're far less likely to receive a lot more severe weather thanks to how dry it is for most of the United States, besides maybe the southern United States. But even then, although there's a subtropical jet moving through the southern United States during an El Nino phase, there isn't enough instability within the subtropical jet, because obviously the subtropical jet is much weaker than the polar jet, since the subtropical jet is already within a relatively warm environment, while the polar jet stream is separating the very cold Arctic air from the warm 30-degree latitude air, which is a stark contrast when it comes to temperature. So as a result, during the La Nina phase, we see a lot more thunderstorm activity, and we see the amount of hailstorms and tornadoes become frequent. So I expect an above average severe weather threat for most of the United States, especially the eastern half of the United States, where you're more likely to see tornadoes and a hail threat in your area throughout the United States. Now let's determine the temperature. So while the La Nina and El Nino phase still could apply during the spring, their effect isn't as strong in the spring compared to, let's say, the summer. So do not take the Nino phase um, as important as, let's say, during the winter, because during the spring, the La Nina and El Nino phase aren't really as pronounced as the winter time, but we still need to take a look at it because they still do typically have some sort of an effect. And like I said, we're more likely to see a La Nina headed into this spring, headed into March, April, and May, and even June. So expect more moist conditions right around the eastern half of the United States, cooler air throughout the through the northern half of the United States, and a lot more moist conditions right around the Northwest Pacifics. So not much changes from what you've been experiencing this winter. Since it's unlikely that this phase will change by the time we hit spring, even though the temperatures are rising in the Nino 3.4 region. So let's take a look at the CFS model. And if you're unfamiliar of what this is pretty much the computer model you go to when you want to predict what sort of climate you're gonna what type of weather you're gonna see during a given month in the future. It pretty much uses climatology and um, pretty much brings interprets data in a way that we could see that we could forecast what sort of climate you're going to see headed into the next several months. So let's begin by first taking a look at March of 2021, and you see this, and also this forecast map represents the amount of precipitation within the given month, the anomaly, whether, and the greens represent higher than average precipitation, while the yellows and the orange represent lower than average precipitation. And as you can see, we're expected to see above average precipitation throughout a lot of the Midwest, and this even extends to the Northeast a little bit. So keep that in mind. In March of 2021, you're going to experience a lot more precipitation throughout the Midwest, and that could be a problem because that could increase flooding, and like I said, that could increase the chance of severe thunderstorms since we're going to see a lot of convection and low pressures move through this area, and at least one of them is going to hit an area where it's going to be very unstable enough for thunderstorm and tornado activity. And if we move forward to April of 2021, you see that there's still a lot of moisture. The CFS model is still expecting above average moisture for a lot of the Midwest and throughout the northwestern portion of the United States for the most part, as we are still in the La Nina phase, and this is typical to see above average moisture in the Northwest Pacific and around the Ohio River Valley. So this isn't untypical at all. And also, what comes in with the La Nina phase is drier than average weather conditions in the southern United States and also the southwestern portion of the United States. And also expect warmer than average conditions throughout the southern United States as a result of the drier than usual conditions, because obviously when it's drier, a lot more shortwave radiation from the sun is able to hit the ground and pretty much heat up the air molecules and give it a lot more energy to create a lot more work, which as a result will eventually convert that work into a higher temperature throughout the southern United States. So keep that in mind that it's more than likely going to be a lot warmer and drier than usual throughout the southern United States this spring, and that's definitely not good news for the southwestern portion of California and the southwestern portion of the United States in general, since you guys been dealing with a drought, and that's definitely unfortunate that it isn't likely to change anytime soon. So let's move on to May of 2021, and you see for a lot of the Midwest again, while it's more spotty at this point, the CFS isn't doesn't really have a defined area of where there's going to be a lot more precipitation than average. However, for the most part, I would say more likely than not throughout the Midwest, you're again going to see above average precipitation headed into May, and again you're going to see drier than average conditions throughout the southern United States in general, and this could even extend to the Northwest Pacific, as I think the CFS is might be shifting. It might be predicting this as a result of maybe a phase change in the Nino 3.4, where we could see the La Nina by the time we change over to a neutral phase by the time we hit May, and that could change the overall forecast and the position of this jet stream by the time we hit May, to the point where we won't less likely we're going to see more moist conditions in the in the Pacific Northwest, headed into late spring and going into June. I guess you could consider June. It's technically considered spring still, and the CFS is again forecasting more rain than usual throughout the northern United States. However, a little bit dry in Kansas and Oklahoma, which is considered the heart of where the severe weather is, which is definitely interesting to see how. However, for the most part, we're seeing more moist conditions throughout the eastern half of the United States. This extends even in the Northeast. Mostly dry conditions in the southern side of the United States, and in the Pacific Northwest, mainly moist conditions as well. Now let's take a look at the temperature anomaly, because that's also going to be important. We're going to take a look at the 500 millibar height anomaly, because that also gives a good idea of what to expect when it comes to temperature. And you see that going into March of 2021, you see that a lot of the Northwest Pacific is well below average in terms is expected to be well below average in terms of temperature. And I think the reason why is because it's typical for a La Nina to have cooler than average temperatures in the Pacific Northwest, where the jet stream dips far south enough to bring a lot of that cold air further south, and we're going to see just enough of a northwesterly wind to bring a lot of that Arctic air further south. And also, Pacific jet stream is going to move straight through the Pacific Northwest, so there's going to be a lot more moisture and a lot more cloudiness, which is going to prevent the sun from potentially heating up the Pacific Northwest to a point where you're going to see above average temperatures in the Pacific Northwest. So it seems likely you guys will experience a very damp spring, early spring, I would say in March of 2020, where it's going to be very moist, it's going to be very cold, and it's just going to be very ugly in general. Since it's going to be rainy and cooler than average for the most part. However, outside of that, for most of the United States, it's actually going to be warmer than average, even despite the forecasted amount of moisture that's expected throughout the eastern half of the United States. As I suspect that there's going to be a lot of warm fronts that's going to encourage a lot of strong southerly winds. That's going to bring a lot of that warmer air further northward, and during the early spring, I would say low pressures typically warm up the atmosphere, especially when it comes to the month of March, because while low pressures during the summer typically mean cooler than average conditions throughout the United States, during the winter it typically means you're more likely to see warmer than average conditions when you're very close to a low pressure system, because there's a lot of convergent energy surrounding the low pressure system, and that convergent energy is pretty much work of the air molecules, and the work of the air molecules is converted into heat, and as a result, the temperature is a lot typically a lot warmer around surrounding a low pressure in the winter than a high pressure, where in a high pressure, the shortwave radiation of the sun in the northern hemisphere isn't strong enough to really raise that temperature higher than the low pressure system. So as a result, it seems like the amount of convection won't really make the temperature lower in the eastern half of the United States, and if anything, will increase the temperature. And headed into April, you see that still most of the United States is well above average, and then May it's going to continue and even into June it's expected to be well above average in terms of temperature. And while the Northwest Pacific will still experience some below average temperatures at times, I would say, based off of the CFS model, it's not going to be so drastic to the point where it's going to be just well below average, as you definitely could see a couple months where you will experience above average temperatures as well. So you won't miss out on you won't miss out on the higher than typical temperatures in the Northwest Pacific, I would say, as I think it's going to mostly balance out for the most part. Still, take this with a grain of salt though, because still predicting the spring forecast, especially a couple months ahead, very very uncertain. So keep that in mind. I don't want you guys to make assumptions based off of this. However, I will say that it's the most likely scenario, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen 100%. But let me show you guys my total total spring forecast for 2021, and you see that for the Northeast, I'm expecting the weather conditions to be more warm and moist than usual. It's as a result of the La Nina that's going to bring a lot more convection to this region, and I think during the early spring that those low pressure systems that move into the United States will not only bring a strong southerly wind component to it, which would raise up the temperature throughout the Northeast. It's also going to bring a lot of convergent energy, which will transfer into which will be converted into a higher temperature, which is the reason why I expect it to be more warm and moist than usual throughout the Northeast. And then you see for in terms of the worst of the severe weather, I'm expecting pretty much the Mississippi River Valley to get the worst of the severe weather, and it's pretty much a combination of just a lot of convection that's expected in this area, the history of severe weather when it comes to a La Nina, which is currently expected. If we take a look at the map again during the La Nina phase, tornadoes and hailstorms are far more frequent, and I think that's just gonna combine to just make a bad recipe for the Mississippi River Valley, where you're gonna see a lot more tornadoes and a lot more hailstorms. So keep that in mind, and I expect it to be a much more above average severe weather season for a lot of you guys around the Mississippi River Valley. You see that in the reds right around Kansas, right around Oklahoma, pretty much a heart of the severe pretty much the heart of severe weather in the United States. I'm expecting a mildly severe weather spring, because I think that it's going to be a little bit drier in this region, so there won't be as much convection, there won't be as much instability that would increase and create those thunderstorms. So as a result, I don't expect as big of a severe weather threat than, let's say, the Mississippi River Valley. And then for a lot of the Northwest Pacific, I'm expecting it to be very cool and moist as a result of the Pacific jet that's going to move through the Pacific Northwest, which is going to increase the chances of showers and rain throughout the Pacific Northwest. And then throughout the South, I'm just expecting a very dry and warm winter, which is typical for a La Nina season. But yeah, this is my winter forecast. This still could change. I'll take this as completely truth, and especially when we're still several months away from spring actually happening. However, I will say that it's more likely than not to happen. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and I hope you guys have a good day, a good night, a good morning whenever you're watching this.